The skies above Africa are no longer silent. For decades, foreign cargo planes have flown in and out of the continent, often unchecked, their missions cloaked in secrecy. But this time, Africa struck back. A NATO-linked cargo plane flying low and illegally over Central Africa was intercepted in the dead of night on board crates of missiles, electronic warfare gear, and uniforms with no nation's name. This was not peacekeeping. This was shadow warfare exposed. And here's where the story turns. Long before this dramatic interception, one leader had already warned Africa to prepare. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, just 36 years old, yet already seen by many as the conscience of a rising continent, stood in front of African leaders and said plainly, "They will not fight us openly. They will sneak weapons into our lands, arm our enemies, and pretend to be our friends." His words were dismissed by some as alarmist. Today they sound prophetic. This incident is more than a single airplane caught in African skies. It is the test of whether Africa will bow to hidden wars or rise to protect its own sovereignty. With the creation of AfroOld, the AfroNet digital system, and the One Africa Army Traoré and his allies are rewriting the rules of power. And that terrifies those who once believed Africa would never stand on its own. So I ask you, if America would never allow such a flight over Washington, why should Africa remain silent when it happens over her heartland? Do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's vision is strong enough to shield Africa from these secret wars? Or will foreign powers always find a way to destabilize the continent from within? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe the truth must always speak louder than the headlines. When the news first broke, it seemed almost unbelievable. A NATO-linked cargo plane flying across the heart of Africa, intercepted by a newly formed One Africa Defense Squadron. But this was no accident, no coincidence. It was the direct result of months of preparation and the clear foresight of leaders like President Ibrahim Traoré. Weeks earlier, the One Africa Parliament, pushed forward by reformist voices, including Traoré, had passed a law banning all foreign military cargo flights without explicit clearance. This was not symbolic. It was a shield forged after intelligence reports warned of covert shipments meant to destabilize Africa's fragile peace. Traoré himself had cautioned, "If we do not guard our skies, our enemies will pour fire upon our people from above." That warning became a living reality the night the plane appeared. Radar operators noticed it first. A large aircraft moving unnaturally low outside of approved civilian corridors, hugging the border between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Central African Republic. Its flight plan did not exist in any AU system. To the One Africa Air Force, this was a clear violation. Within minutes, stealth drones, part of the continent's new integrated air defense, a project long advocated by Traoré, were dispatched to shadow the intruder. For 200 minutes, the standoff unfolded. The cargo plane attempted to slip under radar, but the drones locked in, forcing it to land at a classified airstrip near Bangui. What followed would shake the very foundations of Africa's trust in the West. Inside the belly of the aircraft were dozens of unmarked crates. Military investigators pried them open to reveal compact surface-to-air missiles, advanced drone jamming devices, and night vision combat gear. But what stunned officials most were the uniforms' jungle camouflage, with no national insignia designed to mask identity and sow confusion on the battlefield. 2 additional digital crates contained electronic warfare equipment, their purpose to disrupt AfroNet Africa's own sovereign internet system that Traoré had hailed as the spine of our independence. These were not the tools of humanitarian aid. They were weapons of sabotage. Leaked documents from the cockpit told a darker story. The coordinates did not point to any official African government facility. Instead, they aligned with known militia zones in eastern Congo and western Sudan regions, already torn apart by years of bloodshed. It was as if the weapons were designed not to protect Africa, but to prolong its wars. This was precisely what Ibrahim Traoré had warned against in his speeches. When Africa tries to stand tall, they will feed our brothers the bullets to turn against us. They want us divided so they may continue to rule unseen. For skeptics who doubted Traoré's constant calls for vigilance, this interception became undeniable proof. The warnings about NATO and Western interference were no longer whispers of suspicion. They were visible, tangible line inside wooden crates stamped with secrecy. This was not just the story of a plane, it was the story of Africa's awakening. It was the story of a continent finally drawing a line in the sky and saying no more. And at the center of it stood Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader whose vision had made the interception possible. The night the cargo plane was forced to land outside Bangui marked more than a military interception. It marked the climax of a hidden struggle that President Ibrahim Traoré had long warned was inevitable. The crates of weapons were not just physical evidence. They were the embodiment of betrayal. When military officials cracked open the cockpits, recovered documents, the coordinates leapt off the page. Eastern Congo and Western Sudan. These were not the capitals of AU member states. These were militia-controlled zones scarred by decades of unending conflict. The truth was unavoidable. This plane was not serving peacekeepers. It was serving chaos. And here lay the crescendo of Traoré's prophecy. Months earlier, he had stood before African leaders and declared, "They will not confront us openly. They will instead feed our divisions, fueling militias, so that Africa never heals." That night, his words transformed from warnings into evidence. The revelation was no longer theoretical. It was in black ink and contraband steel. The drama reached its height when one of the pilots, reportedly a former Royal Air Force officer, cracked during interrogation. He admitted that the crew had been told the mission was routine resupply, but mid-air their coordinates were changed via encrypted satellite signal. Nigerian air traffic controllers denied knowledge of their flight path, and the pilot realized he was flying into a mission that officially did not exist. 3 of the 6 crew members were identified as private military contractors without NATO affiliation. This confirmed what Traoré had frequently stated. They no longer operate under their national flags. They oppose us using covert methods, mercenaries, and deception. The pilot's testimony was the emotional peak of the operation. His confession exposed the reality of shadow warfare, stripping away the facade of humanitarian aid. Yet as shocking as the discovery was, the public reaction from the African Union was silence. No press conferences, no televised condemnations. This silence, however, was not weakness, it was strategy. Behind closed doors, AU insiders revealed that emergency meetings were being held between Sudan, Uganda, the DRC, and South Africa. The stakes were too high to simply issue a statement. According to diplomatic whispers, President Traoré pressed for the matter to be elevated to the One Africa Supreme Court for investigation, a move that would set legal precedent against NATO's shadow operations. This silence was the silence of a continent sharpening its response. Meanwhile, international media giants, BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, remained quiet. No breaking headlines, no evening reports. Why? According to anonymous AU insiders, Western diplomats were preparing to spin the incident as a rogue humanitarian mission that had accidentally strayed off course. But Africans were not fooled. As one AU source, nicknamed Protocol Black, bluntly put it, the plane didn't get lost, it got caught. This absence of coverage only deepened the sense of betrayal among African citizens, who saw once again that their lives and sovereignty were deemed unworthy of Western headlines. On the streets of Ouagadougou, Kinshasa, and Juba, whispers spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with photos of intercepted crates sparking outrage. If these weapons reached militias, how many more of our children would die? Here, Ibrahim Traoré emerged not just as a national leader, but as the face of continental defiance. His past warnings, once mocked as paranoia, were now vindicated. The people saw him as the one who had dared to speak the truth that Africa's wars were not accidents, but imports. In villages of Burkina Faso, elders reportedly gathered to pray for his safety, calling him the shield of Africa. Across the Sahel, soldiers spoke his name with renewed loyalty, believing that if Africa had leaders like him in every nation, no foreign cargo plane would dare to fly without permission. The true climax of this unfolding drama rests not only in what was found, but in what might come next. Forensic teams are now tracing weapon serial numbers. If they match Western defense contractors, the diplomatic fallout could ignite a storm bigger than any Africa has seen in decades. And at the center of this storm stands Ibrahim Traoré. His insistence on a unified African defense, his early push for Afro-Ould and Afronet, and his warnings about foreign sabotage. Everything now points to him as the leader who saw the writing on the wall before anyone else dared to admit it. This was no longer just about a plane. It was about Africa's reckoning. And for millions, Traoré's voice had become the sound of that reckoning. The interception of the NATO-linked cargo plane did more than uncover weapons. It ripped open the curtain, hiding the true cost of shadow wars in Africa. For every missile in those crates, there was a potential village that could have been destroyed. For every piece of electronic warfare gear, there was a network of schools, hospitals, or communications that could have gone dark. The human toll was not hypothetical, it was imminent. Imagine the families of Eastern Congo, where entire communities live, in fear of militias that arrive without warning, armed to the teeth. Imagine the farmers of Western Sudan who have watched their fields turn into battlegrounds overnight. These are not abstract conflicts. They are lived realities where women, children, and elders bear the heaviest burdens. If those weapons had slipped through, countless civilians would have paid the price. And this was the very point President Ibrahim Traoré emphasized in his speeches. Our people do not manufacture missiles. Our people do not import chaos, yet they bleed for it. His words resonated more than ever in the aftermath of the interception. The political consequences were just as severe. Within days, leaders across the continent faced pressure from their citizens to take a harder stance against unapproved foreign flights. Some governments that once hesitated to back Traoré's calls for sovereignty now found themselves forced to reconsider. South Africa, Uganda, and the DRC reportedly debated stricter no-fly protocols. Even leaders traditionally aligned with Western powers grew uneasy, realizing that being seen as complicit or complacent could erode their domestic legitimacy. Traoré's vision of a continent-wide air defense system no longer looked radical, it looked necessary. Before this event, skeptics dismissed the One Africa Army as a symbolic idea too ambitious to work across 55 diverse nations. But after the interception, the narrative shifted overnight. Here was proof that a joint African defense could achieve what individual states could not: intercepting a NATO-linked plane and exposing its hidden mission. Soldiers across the Sahel and beyond began to feel that they were part of something larger than their national uniforms. They were defending Africa itself. Traoré's insistence that the continent must act as one had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The political aftershocks extended beyond Africa. Whispers in AU quarters suggested that France and the UK were being quietly scrutinized as possible origin points for the weapons. If verified, this could ignite a diplomatic firestorm that would force African states to either sever or radically redefine their ties with NATO countries. Already, the Afro-Ould Reserve Board discussed suspending currency exchange with NATO-affiliated nations until explanations were provided. Such a move would signal a tectonic shift in economic relations, one that Traoré and other reformist leaders had long advocated. They will respect us only when we hold their money in our hands, not theirs. For ordinary Africans, the political consequences merged with deep emotion. Traoré, once seen as a bold but controversial young leader, now embodied resistance itself. Markets in Ouagadougou buzzed with conversations about his prophecy. Radio callers in Nairobi praised his courage. Even in the diaspora, New York, Paris, London, Africans shared the story as proof that their homeland was no longer defenseless. Children who once grew up hearing only about Africa's dependence were now hearing about Africa's defiance. In villages, elders told stories of the night the young captain's warning came true. The symbolism mattered as much as the politics. It was a restoration of dignity. But the incident also set a dangerous precedent. If NATO-linked planes were willing to risk such operations, What might come next? Could there be more flights, more attempts, more hidden shipments slipping past? This uncertainty created both fear and determination. Traoré himself addressed it bluntly in a closed-door meeting. According to insiders, this was not the last plane, but let it be the last time Africa is unprepared. His words captured the moment's urgency. Africa must remain vigilant because the forces seeking to destabilize it will not stop. In the end, the political and civilian consequences converged into a single reality. Africa stood at a crossroads. One path was to continue tolerating hidden wars, foreign manipulation, and endless instability. The other was to seize the moment, build on the interception, and transform unity from a slogan to a shield. The choice many believed was now unavoidable. And leading that choice, standing at the intersection of fear and hope, was Ibrahim Traoré, the man who had warned, prepared, and now symbolized Africa's refusal to be silent. When news of the intercepted NATO-linked cargo plane reached diplomatic circles, the silence of the Western press spoke volumes. In Washington, London, and Paris, officials scrambled to contain the narrative before it spiraled beyond their control. Yet across the globe, the question rang louder than any official statement. What would the United States do if such a plane appeared over its own skies? If a foreign cargo jet loaded with missiles and jamming devices were discovered flying illegally over New York or Washington, there would be no hesitation. American F-22s would scramble. The crew would be paraded before the media, and the incident would be framed as a violation of sovereignty and national security. President Ibrahim Traoré himself had posed this comparison in speeches. Would the United States tolerate a secret flight feeding weapons into its neighborhoods? Then why should Africa? For older Americans watching Africa struggle, the question resonates deeply. Sovereignty is universal, and so is the right to defend it. But the U.S. faces a unique dilemma. On one hand, NATO is its closest military alliance. To admit that a NATO-linked operation was exposed in Africa risks undermining trust in the alliance itself. On the other hand, ignoring or denying the incident could further erode America's credibility across the continent, where trust is already fragile. Some analysts in Washington warn that Africa is slipping away. Once seen as a passive theater for Western aid and influence, it is now becoming a stage where new players, Russia, China, BRICS, are stepping in with open arms. And Ibrahim Traoré, with his unflinching defiance, is emerging as the voice of this shift. In Moscow and Beijing, the interception was likely studied with great interest. Russia, already supplying military partnerships to several Sahel states, could point to the incident as proof that NATO is destabilizing Africa. China, focused on economic expansion, may seize the opportunity to strengthen trade while quietly endorsing Africa's sovereignty. Even within Europe, murmurs of discomfort are growing. If the intercepted weapons are traced back to European defense contractors, Brussels could face a legitimacy crisis. To Africans, this would confirm what Traoré has said all along. They preach stability in the day and deliver weapons in the night. Internationally, Traoré's image is shifting from a regional leader to a continental symbol. In the eyes of Africa's allies and critics alike, he embodies the courage to call out hypocrisy. For older Americans, his defiance recalls moments from their own history, the Revolutionary War, the Civil Rights Movement, when ordinary people refused to bow to larger powers. And that is why this story matters beyond Africa. It is not just about missiles and crates. It is about whether the principles of sovereignty, dignity, and truth apply equally to all nations or only to some. The night skies over Central Africa told a story the world could no longer ignore. A NATO-linked plane heavy with weapons caught flying low and silent. Crates of missiles, tools of sabotage, uniforms without flags. Clear evidence that Africa's wounds were being fed, not healed. And in that moment, the vision of President Ibrahim Traoré rang like a warning bell across the continent. They will not fight us face to face. They will arm the shadows and they will hope we remain blind. But Africa is no longer blind. The interception was not just a military act. It was a declaration that the continent is watching, defending, and uniting. It was proof that the laws passed in the One Africa Parliament are more than words. They are shields. It was proof that Afro-Ould Afronet and the One Africa Army are not mere dreams, but necessities born from the urgency of survival. Still, the danger is far from over. For every plane intercepted, how many more slip by unseen? For every crate uncovered, how many more are buried in villages already suffering under militias? The stakes are higher than headlines will admit. This is not about geopolitics alone. It is about the survival of mothers in refugee camps, children in schools, farmers in their fields. It is about whether Africa will always be forced to fight wars imported from outside, or whether it will finally be allowed to live in peace. And now the world must also answer. Can the United States and Europe acknowledge that Africa has the right to sovereignty as surely as any Western nation? Or will they continue to play games behind closed doors, denying responsibility while the continent bleeds? For millions of Africans, Ibrahim Traoré has become more than a president. He is a symbol of vigilance, a shield of dignity, and a reminder that silence can be broken. His vision is not flawless, but it is rooted in a simple truth. No continent deserves freedom more than the one that has been denied it the longest. So I ask you, do you believe Char's strategies are strong enough to protect Africa from these hidden wars? Can Africa rise as one, or will old powers always find ways to divide it? Please share this video if you believe that you are among the first to support President Ibrahim Traoré in his fight for Africa's sovereignty. And subscribe if you believe the truth should always speak louder than the headlines.